Hello everybody, it's Adrian Plass here, and it's Sounding the Shadows, and it's number 174.
Right.
Actually, we had an email, didn't we, of someone who's been looking back over.
Yes, well,
some of
she only
these.
started listening to them, and when we were up to about 140, and she went back from that, and she said it was like just sort of, I don't know, cataloguing world affairs from the pandemic to the Ukraine-Russian situation.
Well, I think that elevates it a little. I mean,
But
we're
those
trying
things have been going on.
trying to bounce off stuff that happens.
Yeah. Although how on earth we
Well,
bounce
this
off
week is
this
one of
week?
the darkest. Well, I mean, there's so much stuff around, but some of the things that have been happening. There are times when your emotional resolution just starts to fade, and hearing about some of the things that have been done to innocent families, children, elderly people, young people.
And we've only just begun. The horrors have only
begun,
just
yeah,
begun.
yeah.
And
Where everybody knows what we're talking about.
oh,
Yeah.
goodness me. Well, I suppose they do. I mean, we're talking about Hamas and Israel, but we're also talking about an earthquake in Afghanistan that
Yeah,
is
that's
just
true,
another
yeah.
devastating area of the world. I was sitting in our sitting room, Adrian, looking out at our apple tree and thinking it is very hard, isn't it, to really truly believe that such awful things are happening to innocent people in different areas of the world.
Well, they happen in this country in odd spots, individuals,
I suppose
don't they?
do,
But the thing that has really got to me, and I'm sure to many people, is the same question that you ask every time: is how is it possible for people to be able to make the decision to be so cruel, so horribly cruel to innocent children, young people and adults?
And where does it start? I mean, does it start with an ideology that becomes corrupted? Or are you talking about people who are corrupt becoming involved with something? I mean, we had a taste of something not the same, but maybe parallel, didn't we, when we were in Guatemala?
Yeah, we went. This was the most odd visit. We did a lot of little tours to see projects that were being done with children.
This was with, yes, this was with Toy Box, with
nothing
street
to do with sending boxes to.
No.
It was
to do
about
with work
helping street children in South America. But we went to a place called I think it was called Las Minas, and it was actually an old mine. And when you entered it, you went literally from the top down a curving road, a very poor road,
track, I think, yes.
down into the bottom of the pit. And as you went down, you saw houses on left and right. And at the bottom,
Yeah,
we
can
found
we not really quite call them houses?
Well,
I mean, that conjures
yeah.
up a bit of a different image.
prefabricated
Shack
buildings,
places and huts.
And down at the bottom was the project happening, which is what we've been there.
And as
see.
always, there are children being children.
Yes,
As
they're
soon
always
as you
the
give
same,
children the
yeah.
chance, they are singing and dancing and being children.
That's right. But the sinister thing about this setup, and that's what made us think of it. What made us think of it was what's happening this week. That these kids, while they are in the pit, as it were, in the old mine, in that community and that culture, they can grow up with the moral perspective of their parents or of that community, which they do apparently.
But the mothers we talked to were terrified, weren't they, that their children, as young as 7 or 8, could climb up, if you like,
Well, they could walk up
Yeah.
Above the top level of the mine, and as soon as they reached that level, they were within the culture of the gangs.
Well, they could be. I mean, it was a very... Do you remember I don't know. It started off with them being asked to take parcels and earn a little tiny bit of money. And we're talking about very poor community here. And then they would be told that what they'd taken was drugs. And then they would be told that they would be shot by the police if they were found. And then
they would be
tattooed.
killed by the gang if they if they told the police anything about the gang or betrayed them in any way. After a while, all traces of the moral outlook that they'd had a fairly short time ago would have disappeared. And we know from being in various parts of South America that once people and the world, are picked up by these gangs, things happen very quickly and young people die.
Well, they have to do more and more horrible things in order to stay, to preserve their lives. Now, I don't know exactly the situation we're talking about, but we're certainly not talking about Palestine as a whole, but we are talking about a lot of people who have been very poor, very disillusioned with moderate negotiations to improve their lot.
Yeah, there are no easy answers to that, but whoever is doing it, whatever, and there have been people killed by both sides over this week.
It's going to get worse.
Whatever is happening, it is still almost impossible for me anyway to understand how one could be deliberately, unnecessarily, brutally appalling to children. I do not understand that.
No.
And I guess it makes you ask the question about, for each of us or all of us, who is in charge? I mean, when you live in this country or in the West as we do, you actually don't get challenged as much, or not visibly. I think we actually do have challenges.
I think it depends where we live, even in this country, Adrian.
But we don't. I mean,
no,
we don't have to make choices about whether to be brutal to kids or not. But it just makes you think about who the authority is in your life. I mean, who told you what is good and what is bad? Who is the person who, when you have to make a decision, affects that decision that you make?
Well, and where does that start? I remember we just mentioned South America, but I remember a conversation in which somebody said, you have no idea how lucky you are to live in a Christian country. And I remember both you and I thinking, well, if you look at our churches, at our numbers of Christians versus people who would be of other faiths or none, it's not really quite like that. And she said, no, you don't understand. You have a tradition of Christianity.
Yeah, that's
now,
right,
obviously, you also have a tradition of colonialism and empire and a lot of other things that aren't so good. But it is true that we have been very fortunate to have inherited, I suppose, a moral outlook that it certainly couldn't maybe become as extreme, do you think, as allowing? I don't know. I know there's a lot of young people in a lot of tough areas of our country who are carrying knives, and so it's awfully smug for us to talk.
I don't actually feel very smug at the moment. I feel quite demoralised by what can happen to people, and I have no idea how I would last out if I was in a position where, say, people I loved were threatened, or I had to do something that I would never ever have chosen to do in order to make something good happen, or something that I thought was good. And we were talking the other day, a friend and us were talking about the fact that a lot of the talks you get, say, in the Christian church, we don't go to other religious groups really, but they're often about how you behave and what you should do and how you should react to God or people. But the thing that is so often missing at the end of them is expressed really by two words, which are, okay, so what? So what do you do?
So
what do you do? How do you move from hearing that this is good and right and proper, if you haven't grown up like that and you don't have that within you? How do you move towards having a perspective and a moral outlook that is the one that you've been told is the right one? I mean, how do you do that? And often in the teaching about these things, what is missed out? Only one thing is practice. You know, we talk about practicing just about everything else. You start with small steps, you build up.
Well, I'm not sure
learn.
if we were talking about this last week or whether we were just talking about it with our friends, but having watched the World Gymnastics, and just particularly, there was an interview with the young guy, Jake Jarman, who won the vault. I mean, that is the only thing we did win. But the point about it was that they were saying, what you've got to understand is that he will be practicing that one thing. Hour in, hour out.
And he will do it perfectly 100 times.
Absolutely, but it still could go wrong.
Yeah.
So he is building strength. He's building muscle memory. He's building physical and mental and emotional strength. We're talking about a sort of spiritual core strength, I suppose, and it doesn't just apply, well, maybe a spiritual core strength, but a humane core strength.
Well, a moral core strength.
Strength.
Yeah.
And that is, as you say, practicing.
Well, I think that is part of it, that everyone is faced with choices all the time.
Yeah.
And I know, one of the stories I used to tell, probably still do, I don't know how long it's since I last told it, but about getting off a train and seeing an elderly lady heading for the only taxi there.
Yeah.
And telling myself, well, she probably doesn't want that taxi. If I just run past her, I could get that taxi.
There's bound to be another
one. And then I could get home. And I started to run past her. And you know how the referees hold up a red card nowadays, or when footballers do something wrong.
Yeah.
I could almost see the red card saying, you know.
It's a foul.
You've made a choice. You've made a choice. You are going to prevent this poor sad old lady from getting this taxi because you want to go home. So, I mean, it's not a huge thing, but it's the sort of thing you do get faced with, and where the problem with it is, I think, that within some of the churches that we've known, that there's a sense in which people have elevated, I don't know how to put this, elevated the influence of God in situations to the point where you don't have to do anything.
Oh, right.
Once you say, that we met a man after a meeting once who said, I've been waiting 20 years for God to make me obedient.
Yes.
And I said to him, I don't think you quite understood the concept of obedience, have you? That, it's tough. It's really hard. And it means that there will be times when you want to do something and you don't do it, or you don't want to do something and you do it.
Yes.
And we've all failed miserably in that from time to time.
I was thinking, Adrian, that in children's stories, it's a clear definition, isn't it, between who are the monsters and who are the innocents. I mean, a lot of children's stories, in order
by the way,
to...
before you go on, I did let her have the taxi. Just so you know, because I was more frightened of the red card than the.
No, you were
not.
You suddenly.
I just thought I
realised,
can't do this.
I know.
Anyway, sorry.
Well, I was just thinking, if you think of children's stories, as I say, they are pretty black and white. They're ugly, mean sisters, or it's a troll who says, I'm a troll foldy roll and I'm going to eat you, with the billy goat's gruff or whatever. It's quite clear, and obviously part of it, is good. It allows children to face fears but the thing is, it's the monster the little tiny monster that can be inside you, the little greedy monster that can grow if you feed it. Sorry, I was just remembering a video I saw. Well, I think it was something a lot of people watched, a sort of YouTube thing in which there was an experiment with 5-year-olds, and they put this big chocolate cake in the middle of the table, and these little boys, then they watched to see whether they would eat it. And they compromised.
She said they weren't to touch it.
They weren't to touch it,
so
and they
didn't.
Compromised by licking it.
They licked it.
That's not funny, but it is a good example of how deep inside us there's a way to find a way to get what we want. And if that isn't curbed and taught, what the people who've just invaded Israel want. is an independent Palestinian state. But that's very far away from allowing the monster within you to rule your actions.
I don't know what is.
And it may well be that similar things happen the other way. No, I know you don't. I don't either. But what I mean is that it's not so far away from any of us. Well, it is. It's a long.
It does make you think about. I mean, one of the ways in which we circumvent this kind of responsibility is a bit like the golden calf that Aaron builds with the Israelites while Moses is busy up the mountain getting the laws, to create something that will be an authority, something that will be the God, that will allow you to do the thing you want to do, which is what that was for. And even within religious cultures, Christianity included, it's very easy to create a set of rules that are not called rules. In fact, they are sometimes called freedom.
That's right.
But the rules are as binding as any rule ever was.
Yes.
Because they allow people to be what, broadly speaking, they want to be.
Yeah.
And actually, you know, we've talked a lot recently about the cross and the fact that Paul, for instance, preaches the cross. He preaches Christ and Him crucified.
He does, and insists on it, doesn't he?
And insists on it. And the example is of someone who said, no, I'm not going to do those things.
Yeah.
I'm not going to have the things that I might have chosen to. I'm going to do the thing that I personally have been asked to do, which will be the best possible thing. And to do that, you really have to be ready. I mean, he went through the desert and the temptations and all the rest of the stuff that happened to him. He wasn't a very happy chappy most of the time.
And there will be hundreds and thousands of good, kind people looking after their children in both these countries that we're talking about, who have nothing, have not allowed monsters to grow within them. I've never forgotten, and it's not quite connected, but do you remember the African who said that young man who said they have an expression in their country, which is when the elephants fight, the grass gets trampled.
Yeah, I do remember
and that comes back to me every time. I'm not saying this is exactly a fight. It's an extraordinary escalation of a horrifically difficult situation. And we had a Palestinian guide, most wonderful girl, when we were in Israel, didn't we? When we were looking at the Holy Land, and she was a joy. And there will be so many good, honest, sweet people, both in both countries. When the elephants fight, the grass gets trampled. It's heartbreaking.
But in the end, we can only look at what is happening to us individually. I mean, obviously we look at that, but just to make sure we're not kidding ourselves and that we are, I don't know.
Yeah, the monsters are not someone else.
Yes, that's right. It's very easy to say those people are like this and we're not, and we favour that country or that. I don't know. There are, as you say, a lot of innocent people around the world who just get squished by this kind of thing.
Yeah, and a lot of people without a choice. Who are doing the thing that somebody else has decided is right. It's so heartbreaking, and I think of Jesus weeping over Jerusalem, Adrian, and I feel so sorry for
it's a strange little bit, that, isn't he, where he's looking down and he's saying, I called you, I can't remember exact words, but so many times I called you to be with me, and you would not.
Yeah.
Because there comes a point in our lives, and it's a really quite frightening point where I think you have to make the decision about whether you will, to go back to our good old Churchill phrase, do the thing that is required rather than the best you can, because sometimes the thing that is required goes beyond who you are. And you then ask yourself, who is in charge of me? Who is in charge of me? who is it who, for instance, with Christians, people talk about the mind of Christ. You know, what is the mind of Christ? That's the direction we go in. Well, if you really want to stop and think about that when you're making decisions, it could have quite a powerful effect on what happens to you. But it's tough.
And people within both the religions of the people we're talking about, there will be good people trying to search out what is the right way forward.
Yeah.
And I think we need to pray for all of them. It feels so small, the idea of praying for a situation like this. One voice, another voice, another voice. But that's what Jesus told us to do.
I'm quite sure we should.
Yeah.
Quite sure we should. And I don't know anything else to say about that.
No.
But anyway, it's good to be with you again.
Yes, and we know that many, many of you will be feeling as wretched as we are about this and as helpless.
Yeah.
And we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, stay in touch. God bless you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.